Hey there, Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher X video. All right, we're looking at another current event story, likely mixed in with historical context, which is what I'm always looking for current events for my channel, since this is a history channel. And we're headed back to Warfronts this time. That's a channel hosted by Simon Whistler, and I've looked at his stuff for a couple different events recently. The last one being Pakistan and India. And although they're different topics, one thing you can tell, if you're looking at analysis from one voice, that although the topics may be different, you may see a similarity in framing, or perhaps not. And if you've been following along with these current event videos that I've looked at with Simon, maybe keep that in mind and do a little bit of compare and contrast. Then, of course, compare and contrast that with other outlets, because that's always beneficial when you're trying to learn about history or current events. Okay, the original video is down below. Check that out. Let's get started. Although there has been military interaction between Israel and Iran for decades, what's being looked at here is in direct connection to the events that have been happening over the last couple days. And today, by the way, is Sunday, June 15th. So it's good to know the immediate context and, of course, the long-term context.
Israel and Iran are at war. At the time of writing, it hasn't been formalized, but after what happened in the pre-dawn hours...
By the way, this video came out 2 days before I've looked at this. So again, I'm looking this on Sunday, June 15th, and it said 2 days ago on this one. So that would have been Friday, June 15th, which is right when these immediate events were starting.
Are at war. At the time of writing, it hasn't been formalized, but after what happened in the pre-dawn hours of June the 13th, it's as good as done. Israel has launched a massive sequence of airstrikes, sabotage, and targeted assassination across Iran, targeting the country's nuclear facilities, its military leadership, and its ballistic missiles. Iran has made clear its intent to retaliate in kind. The United States stands ready to respond with overwhelming force, and the time for negotiation has conclusively passed.
Now, in the last couple days, what you have heard is eyes, of course, being on the Americans. What would be the American involvement, as the U.S. and Israel have been very tight. And of course, there has been history of political problems between the United States and Iran for decades as well. Now, President Trump came out and said that direct United States involvement would happen if Iran was to target, say, military bases that the United States has. And the U.S. government has also said that the United States has not directly been a part of the offensive actions, but provides help in defensive actions. So take those statements for what you will. That's at least the public communication that's been going on.
The showdown that the Middle East has been building toward for decades, and it's finally here. Israel and Iran, 0 seconds to midnight. Here's what you need to know in advance of what comes next.
Okay, so we'll see how far back
before we begin, we've got to issue a very important caveat here.
That's the current.
Everything that we discussed today is accurate to the best of our ability.
Operation by Israel.
9 o'clock in the morning, local time in Tehran on Friday, June the 13th. We have worked to produce and publish this episode as quickly as possible. Indeed, I'm heading off on holiday this afternoon. I wasn't even supposed to be in the office this morning, but they're at war. But we can practically guarantee...
That's something you got to keep in mind about current events, is they are exactly that. They are current events. And one of the hardest things is to analyze the events as quickly as possible, because things are always unfolding. We'd also know with the democratization of information about current events that the more current the news that you may be consuming, depending on your source, is also more likely to be inaccurate. So I think that's an important skill to understand.
Guarantee that the situation will have the office this morning, but they're at war. But we can practically guarantee that the situation will have evolved further by the time that you see this episode. Rest assured that we will be back to cover major developments in due time. Indeed, I'm back from holiday next week. With that out of the way, let's begin. The explosions began at about 3 o'clock in the morning, again, local time in Tehran. In Jerusalem, the attack was dubbed Operation Rising Lion. Among the most important targets for Israel was a key uranium enrichment facility called Natanz, where Iran has worked to prepare enough uranium at the proper enrichment levels that it could create weapons-grade material on short notice. Images circulating on social media in the immediate aftermath of Israel's first wave of strikes showed Natanz in flames with smoke billowing high into the sky. According to the chief of Iran's Atomic Energy Agency, Natanz is now severely damaged. But Natanz was far from Israel's only target. According to sources from within Israel's defense apparatus, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, hit a number of sites relating to Iran's nuclear program, as well as its missile launch capabilities and its command and control infrastructure. A number of hits were reported across the capital city of Tehran, including at 6 separate military bases, 2 secure command posts, and residential units where important Iranian figures lived. The headquarters...
Something to keep in mind too, another context thing is is this, right? This is talking about trying to hurt the nuclear weapon capability of Iran. Now, if you did not know, which countries have nuclear weapons? And it said that there are currently 9, and the list being the US, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, North Korea, and Israel. Iran not having those.
To secure command posts and residential units where important Iranian figures lived. The headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard Corps was reported to be in flames by the time the first strike ended.
Now, one caveat about that is Israel has not officially acknowledged their nuclear weapons, but it is widely believed that they do exist there. Now, of those 9, 3 countries are not in what's called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Those countries being Pakistan, India, and North Korea. Now, since Israel is not officially declaring their nuclear capabilities, they're also technically not part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, the treaty itself is meant to, as quoted here, prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology and promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy to further the goal of nuclear disarmament. And go ahead and take the wording of that to what you will, if you believe that countries have that as a goal for themselves. Anyway, let's continue.
Lived. The headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard Corps was reported to be in flames by the time the first strike ended, with some accounts indicating that a crisis meeting between senior leaders was underway when the facility was hit. Iran declared a nationwide state of emergency in response, although by the time it went into effect, a second wave of strikes was already on its way. After a few hours, Israeli sources reported that the IDF had logged around 300 successful hits, with that number only expected to rise as the situation evolves. According to a wide range of sources speaking anonymously to the global press, Israel's first wave of attacks went far beyond just airstrikes. Israeli intelligence elements linked to the Mossad organization moved into action all across the country, especially in urban areas, carrying out a range of acts of sabotage and targeted assassination.
Say Mossad, if you didn't know, is an organization in which they carry out covert missions, like the CIA, for example, in the US.
Especially in urban areas, carrying out a range of acts of sabotage and targeted assassination. Now, the specifics of those operations, not yet known as of the time of writing, but already it is clear that the cultivation of assets and the preparation on the ground for an attack of this scale must have taken years. In addition to high-level officials, Mossad targeted Iran's air defense systems as well as its ballistic missiles and launch equipment.
Now, we'll see if he brings it up. You know, he's talking about like preparation in years, or at least that has been ready 4 years. I do feel like that is different than just saying they were preparing and that say like this date was going to be the target all along, that there was maybe some choice about that, but it could always be something ready. That's something like he was saying is probably still unfolding. So we don't know.
Israeli intelligence sources have indicated that the nation also worked to create a false sense of security for Iran immediately prior to the attack, including a vacation for Benjamin Netanyahu and an upcoming wedding for his son. Just as important as the locations that Israel hit are the individuals that Israel has eliminated. Yeah. Among those who have been confirmed dead are Hossein Salami, the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Mohammad Bagheri, chief of staff of the entire Iranian military. Also among the dead, the Gholam Ali Rashid, commander of the central headquarters of the Iranian General Staff, and Ali Shamkhani, the senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, who was entrusted to be Iran's chief negotiator.
So this has actually been something ongoing. I mean, so you had these 4 very high-ranking people as part of these targeted attacks, meaning they're, you guess you consider them assassinations because it's like directly targeting and identifying like an individual in that location. The United States has done this too in recent years. Right at the beginning of 2020, the United States killed an Iranian major general back then, which Pentagon said was a response to the death of servicemen at the hands of him as well. So there's a perspective to look at from, I guess, the Iranian side, is seeing these multiple generals having been attacked, having been killed.
In working toward a new nuclear deal with the United States. In totality, Israel is believed to have eliminated a large portion of Iran's top military leadership, if not most or even all of the nation's most important military decision makers. Just as important is the list of people who've survived thus far. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, President Masoud Pezeshkian, Foreign Minister
political leaders,
Minister of Defense Aziz Nasir Zadeh.
Except him.
None of them are believed to have been targeted by this wave of Israeli strikes. but that could change in the future. As of the time of writing, Iran is only engaged in a limited retaliation, with the IDF reporting that Iran has launched a number of kamikaze drones toward Israel. While the reason for the lack...
Now, in the last 48 hours, there have been significant attacks that have come from Iran, many of which have not been stopped by the famous Iron Dome, which does intercept an incredible amount of air-to-surface missiles that come into Israel. But of course, something like that can be limited due to the size or the speed of the attacks. So both sides have done and succeeded in direct attacks.
The IDF reporting that Iran has launched a number of kamikaze drones toward Israel. While the reason for the lack of larger immediate response hasn't been confirmed outright, it's hardly a secret. Israel's attack appears to have been quite clearly intended to destroy Iran's command and control infrastructure, and Israel now appears to have succeeded. Iran's supreme leader has already appointed a few replacement figures, including a new chief of staff of the armed forces, but that's only one small part of what Iran will need to do in the coming days.
If you don't know about Iranian political structure too, you may get kind of confused about how, they have something like Khomeini, who is seen as a leader culturally, especially culturally, but also is seen as a supreme political leader. But then you also have a president who doesn't lead as much in the religious sense, but far more in its political sense. So you can't quite equate it to like Japanese shogun to a emperor, where it's just like complete division of like religion and politics, I guess. But in this case, the president is seen as like second, I guess, in command, with their supreme leader being technically above that.
Forces, but that's only one small part of what Iran will need to do in the coming days. With the magnitude and scope of what Israel has achieved, it's likely that Iran's surviving military leaders will need time before they can even figure out who's supposed to be in charge now. Iranian MiG-29 fighter jets did scramble to respond, but it's unclear whether or not any air-to-air engagements actually took place. If they did, then this may well be the day that the American-made F-35 fighter, specifically the customized version that Israel flies, gets its first test in head-to-head aerial combat.
Yeah, I don't know as of now of like dogfights or anything, but those attacks from Israel to Iran were done with these fighter pilots. You get a little more precision that way and speed.
Reports to that effect. Gets its first test in head-to-head aerial combat. Reports to that effect have not yet emerged as of yet. With the Middle East on a knife's edge.
Okay, key context. This is the stuff that I find is much more the goal for what I try to learn about and analyze, and far more within my purview of my background and my training and my skill as an educator, history specifically.
We'll wait for another day to explain the ins and outs of how we got here. The most important context, however, is to do with the ongoing nuclear negotiations between Iran and the United States. Over the last few months...
Yeah, and it's hard to do that, to not do that, because there's always larger context. We're talking about decades. But with Netanyahu, he looks like he's about to break down, citing the goal and the intention of these attacks was to cripple their nuclear development capabilities. That obviously is going to be really important with the context of what has been the negotiations and the understandings about their sort of role in this nuclear community. And this, by the way, is going to bring in the United States very much, because a key part of negotiations and diplomacy between the countries has been around Iran's nuclear deals, with the U.S. occasionally intervening to either limit that or to make deals. Iran will scale that back, but that also can change with different type of administration change, like we've seen with the United States. You had, these deals that have gone on for a long time under like the Obama administration. Then they'll change with like the first Trump presidency, and then the craziness that went on in 2020 to 2024 with the Biden administration. Then also you had Russia, Ukraine, the October 7th attacks in Israel, and now coming all the way back to the Trump administration again.
To do with the ongoing nuclear negotiations between Iran and the United States. Over the last few months, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has come out as a staunch opponent of the talks, arguing that Iran cannot be trusted to engage in a nuclear deal of any sort, and it's a foolhardy endeavor to even try and come to terms. Those concerns...
So you can see this is where they Israel would feel the need to have something like this, a plan in place to intervene if the global community is going to make deals in which Iran agrees, at least in part, to their nuclear power. And if they're at the distrust level, which it seems they have been for Israel, I guess that would be the context in which they would have this very deeply organized operation that they can basically flip a switch on. However, with these plans and this operation having been in place, or at least major parts of it in place within the last couple years, especially within the context of the current conflict in Gaza with Israel, there's likely some timing decisions that are going to be affected by that.
Been validated by recent reports that to even try and come to terms. Those concerns have been validated by recent reports that found that Iran is rapidly increasing its stockpiles of low-enriched uranium. That affords Iran a dangerous breakout capability, and experts now estimate that within a span of weeks, Iran could enrich enough of its existing stocks to weapons grade, which it could use to build 10 nuclear warheads.
Now, this is something that there's probably a mix of speculation about, okay, how close is Iran to a weaponization of their uranium sources and things like that. It's also not something I would say is new, as this claim about Iran being very close has come up before and again, which it seems has led many people to be a little bit apprehensive about the timelines that may currently being talked about from Israel's administration. So I guess it depends on what that information actually is and if it's substantiated, because maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
It would take longer for Iran to build and assemble a delivery mechanism for them, but that would likely be a matter of just months. According to Israel, however, even that is an undercount. Speaking to the global press as strikes were already underway, Israeli officials alleged that Iran had enough uranium to produce 15 nuclear bombs. Not only that, but they alleged the bombs were already being assembled and that Iran was just days away from final nuclear breakthrough.
Now in under older plans that even the United States has been a part of in the foreign community, there would be basically like inspections and some data that would be collected for going into Iran and analyzing these facilities and things like that. Now, what I don't know specifically is under what agreements there are now between Iran and the nuclear community, because I know that has changed in recent years, especially since the Obama administration. That I will need to look into more if you were wanting some more context with that, but maybe he'll give it. We'll see.
Bombs were already being assembled and that Iran was just days away from final nuclear breakthrough. Now, we do have to emphasize here that those claims have not been validated independently, but as of now, they're the explanation that Israeli sources have provided for the strike. Since the start of the nuclear negotiations, the United States under Donald Trump has worked to hold Israel in check, making sure that Israel didn't carry out a strike several months ago and demanding a chance to establish a diplomatic settlement. As recently as 2 weeks ago, Washington was urging Jerusalem to be patient and avoid launching strikes, citing the fact that Iran was at that time still participating actively in the negotiating process. But now...
Yeah, I know that has been a big, I guess, accusation about the timing of these attacks is the U.S. and Iran, at least from what I thought I had heard, was about to sit down in the next coming weeks and get this deal, squared away. With the accusation being that Israel wanted to maybe make these attacks before that, which I guess would then have the hopes that the United States would be less likely to have a more, favorable deal that would favor Iran more. So I don't know if you would call that sabotaging this or trying to have some kind of upper hand. Although those negotiations are supposed to be between the United States and Iran and not necessarily Israel at the seat there.
With Trump seeming to grow more skeptical about Iran's willingness to work with the US, it's unclear that he tried to prevent Netanyahu from taking action. Trump and Netanyahu spoke by phone as recently as Monday, but few details about the content of that call have been disclosed to the public. Iran has insisted that it retain the ability to enrich uranium on its own territory, a clear non-starter for Israel, and efforts to work out a compromise don't appear to have had any success.
By the way, one of the things that complicates this process too is the idea of nuclear power, which seems to be, considered by many kind of the future for powering our cities and our lives. But we know that enriching uranium and doing all these things in that process can also lend itself to the development of nuclear weapon. So you get this dilemma of, are we trying to push to nuclear power as a society, as a globe really, or are there a lot more caveats that are going to be inserted into this?
non-start for Israel, and efforts to work out a compromise don't appear to have had any success. Prior to Israel's wave of attacks, the US and Iran were scheduled to meet in the nation of Oman this Sunday in a sixth-round, last-ditch attempt to establish a nuclear settlement.
That is where, okay, so even as likely as, I don't know if that means today or whatever, but within, weeks, I heard that those negotiations were ready to begin. So was that the biggest motivating factor for why these attacks from Israel onto Iran happened literally within days of the potential negotiations?
According to US officials, America still intends to be present for those talks as scheduled, although it's not clear that Iran will have any desire to come to the table. Not only has the nation's lead negotiator been killed, but it's not even clear that Iran has a nuclear program to negotiate over anymore. Nor is it clear that Iran has any interest in pursuing an off-ramp after what's just happened all across the country.
Because if anything, wouldn't this probably lead to Iran really trying to hold on to being able to be in control completely of their own nuclear capabilities? Does this make it more likely that Iran could weaponize this power? So it seems like the United States could have a very large role for how this thing turns out within the goals of what Israel wants, with Iran having those weapons and again perceiving them as an existential threat.
Right now, it's impossible to say for sure how this conflict will end. But we can say with some confidence that it will not be ending quickly. According to Benjamin Netanyahu himself, Operation Rising Lion is expected to persist for several days at least. Other Israeli sources suggest that Jerusalem is ready to keep things going for weeks or even longer if need be. Israel's leadership was shifted to secure locations within hours of the start of the strikes, and the nation has closed its airspace and placed all of its hospitals on notice for a large-scale emergency. Israeli news channels are reporting that the nation's leaders expect Iran to unleash a massive, coordinated drone and missile assault, possibly lasting for days or even weeks.
And that has been going on. If you're watching this video, which again is likely going to be on Monday the 16th, that has happened. So then does it just become retaliation ping pong? Because then you don't know how long this could go. Now, what you will see, and you're probably seeing right now, is, of course, a lot of posture. What neither side is necessarily going to say is, we don't have the capability to retaliate, or in fact, it's usually the opposite. It's like, we can do this forever, and we can do this on a huge scale that's never been seen. You'll see a lot of that posturing type of publicity.
Iran is believed to possess around 2,000 heavy-yield ballistic missiles, as well as many tens of thousands of unmanned kamikaze drones and at least a few thousand long-range cruise missiles. It is critically important to understand here that just hitting Iran really hard doesn't necessarily interrupt Iran's ability to launch a massive counterattack, and Iran has spent years planning and distributing its aerial projectiles and launch systems to ensure that it could retaliate even if its command and control infrastructure was decapitated.
I think it is important to note, in case you didn't know, that the difference between Iran and basically every other power of that region is almost like non-comparable. And I'm not just talking about, like, say, Gaza, Palestine as a whole, or like Lebanon or Syria. Iran is at another level.
It's equally vital to understand that although Israeli air defenses are robust, no air defense system is infallible anywhere in the world. Air defenses can only shoot down as many incoming projectiles as they have interceptors.
Right.
And with the sheer volume that Iran could launch its weapons, it's a distinct possibility that Israeli or even American air defenses could be overwhelmed, leading to mass casualties on the ground.
And we have seen an element of that within this last 48 hours of bombs getting into locations, I believe Tel Aviv as well. So there has been vulnerability. And one thing I don't know necessarily, especially with the Iron Dome, is how deeply stocked is it? Like, how quickly can they replenish those defenses? I do not know, because this could end up being maybe the largest attack, I think, since the Iron Dome's been in its present form right now, which again would further involve the United States, as the United States has declared itself and offered its support for defensive measures.
American air defenses could be overwhelmed, leading to mass casualties on the ground. But for Israel's part, the Netanyahu government appears entirely committed to the cause. This was not a mere warning shot by Israel. Jerusalem did have the option to launch a more limited attack, maybe destroy some air defense systems or drop inert, non-exploding munitions at the locations of Iran's senior leadership in order to coerce Iran into accepting more favorable terms at the meeting in Amman this weekend.
What will and I kind of said this before, but just to, I guess, reiterate and clarify, but it has been very much proposed that if U.S. sites, because the United States has bases, personnel, and things like that in the region, that if Iran targets those directly and directly hits that, then you will see direct engagement by the United States. Now, what does that mean? Maybe it's just rockets, jets, and stuff like that. Because again, like we're saying, a boots on the ground type of thing is a very different thing with Iran than anywhere else in the region. So that is to be determined. And what will be interesting here is to see how much Iran really tries to avoid direct engagement with the Americans.
Instead, Israel went for the throat in a series of strikes that aren't even somewhat debatable in their intent. And Israel fully understands that this will demand retribution. As for the role of the United States, Israel's most important international backer, that remains to be seen. On the one hand, there's a decent argument to be made that Israel's actions may have been intended as a slap in the face to America's Trump administration, with whom Netanyahu is known to be on less than ideal terms for reasons that we won't be getting into.
Very rocky.
Who is known to be on less than ideal terms for reasons that we won't be getting into today. For Israel to carry out such a devastating series of strikes, when by all accounts the US plan to meet with Iranian officials this weekend, could be read as an outright dismissal of America's priorities and strategic leadership. On the other hand, if Washington tacitly signed off on the attack or privately endorsed Israel's plans, then it's equally fair to say that the nation might benefit from looking as if it's been caught off guard.
That really is such a huge point, is that the United States and you've seen multiple leaders basically wash their hands of this, say, we had nothing to do with these offensive attacks. We only get involved in the defensive protection of Iran. But at least that's the public perception. Now, where you're already seeing people talk about it, and you're going to probably see it in the comments here, please be respectful to each other, though, is whether or not the United States was fully aware, supportive, taking, I don't know, even a assertive leadership role in these attacks. That's still going to be under a lot of speculation. And depending on who you are, you're probably more or less primed to believe or not believe it.
But the most troubling possibility is that Israel may intend to lure the United States into a larger conflict, even against its own will, by launching such a large assault that Iran is almost guaranteed to retaliate at large scale. Quoting National Security reporter John Hudson on X, a US official says this attack will provoke a significant Iranian response that the Israelis will then ask the United States to help counter, despite the fact that it just blew up the delicate US diplomatic talks. End quote.
Yep.
That request...
But again, publicly, it's saying unless Iran directly attacks American installations, then that's not going to happen, but we don't know. Who knows, right?
Would be a hard one for Washington to refuse, and even more so if American assets are targeted by Iran alongside the nation of Israel. American military might would go a very long way in supporting Israel's objectives, although Israel might be most interested in one specific military asset. And that would be the GBU-57, better known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 5,000-pound bunker buster that's designed to burrow into the ground and destroy Iran's most hardened nuclear facilities, where Israel's best munitions still can't touch. American warplanes are stationed around the Middle East in such great numbers that they could lay waste to Tehran if they get the go-ahead. For now, we'll have to leave it at that. But as this crisis evolves, we are very confident that the trouble has only just begun. Be safe, be smart, watch closely for whatever comes next.
True.
Thank you for...
Final thoughts. Firstly, my dear viewer, if you are in any way in harm's reach of this conflict, I truly hope you are safe. And with that being said, for the rest of us in the comfort of our own homes, make sure you're understanding current events through the lens of history. Context is everything, but the future still to be determined. All right, we'll see you all next time.